As Paul said, I've known the President and First Lady for 19 years. They get communities. They come from communities. They've worked in communities. And they've worked in communities the way you do. If anyone told me, this is true. So when Brock wrote Dreams from My Father, we were having a staff meeting, and he came to the office, a box of these things, and he gave us each one. None of us bothered to have him sign them. And I can guarantee you none of us read. In fact, my colleague, Tony Allen, threw his in the airport garbage. Because we're like, I mean, it's Michelle's husband. He's this kind of aloof 29-year-old community organizer writing his life. Who writes their life story at 29? You know, and so I put the book on the shelf. Every time we were with her, Michelle was Michelle is someone we all kind of looked up to as kind of the leader we all tried to be like when we worked with her. And so, you know, whenever we were with the two of them, we were completely focused on her. It was like, yeah, okay. If I knew then what I knew now, I would have been like, hey, you know, would you be my mentor? Could we go out for coffee? You know, like I would have totally played that differently. But in any event, it's true what Paul said, that I mean, I worked with them at that point. No one looked at Barack and Michelle Obama in 1993 and said, President, First Lady. They said, community organizer, civil rights lawyer, nonprofit executive director of a small startup. That's who they were. And so it is incredibly inspiring and exciting that in our nation, our leaders come from that background, understand this work. Michelle and I were faculty members of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute. How many of you have heard of Asset-Based Community Development, John McKnight and Jody Kretzmann's work? So Michelle spent 8 years traveling around the country training people in ABCD. And John McKnight, who's the leader of that field, wrote the president's Harvard Law School recommendation. In his book, The Audacity of Hope, he closes the book with a story of the wise old Northwestern professor who taught him about morality and politics, and that was John McKnight. And so they truly come from this experience, from this work, from the kinds of relationships you have with each other. So be really good to each other. Is the main lesson I have. You just never know. If someone gives you a book, be like, hey, great, check it out. Don't make that mistake. So the White House Council on Community Solutions. The president appointed us in December of 2010 after all the vetting, which is a whole other story. And it was a pretty esteemed group of people. Patty Stonecipher, our chair, was the founding CEO of the Gates Foundation and one of the 4 board members along with Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett, so she has a little bit of pull in the world. Judith Rodin, CEO of the Rockefeller Foundation, the rock singer John Bon Jovi, Steve Jobs' wife, who's an incredible leader on education issues in the United States, the CEO of eBay. I mean, it was a fairly esteemed group of leaders. And the charge was given to us in 2 parts. The first is that the president wanted us to not just produce a report. He wanted us really to try and catalyze action. The second is that they decided that the focus, and this was really Melody Barnes, the domestic policy advisor, chose this, was that in America there's 6.7 million young people ages 16 to 24 who are both out of school and out of work, and who have very limited opportunities for their futures. And if we don't get a number of them on the pathway now, they will never get on the pathway. And so the context of us doing this was, hey, we want to bring all these powerful people together, and we want you to figure out what can you do to move the country on this issue of disconnected youth. And let's do something that's not a report. So in doing this work, we came together, and as I said, the goal was to create this movement around people. The thing that kind of changed the conversation, again, which relates to your experiences, is thinking I've been doing for a long time. My organization works with over 600 nonprofits each year across the United States. And the one thing you learn when you work with so many organizations is how fragmented everything is. We simply operate in a way that's opposite how people live their lives. They get their education outcome here, their health outcome here, their economic outcome here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We divide them up. And we'd see how the turf wars among organizations and the fights to raise money and prove your outcomes are the best and all this stuff. And what I'd see every year was lots of organizations claiming success. So I get a fundraiser, a mailing of a youth organization. I say, we serve 25,000 children. We've increased their reading levels this much. We've achieved these outcomes with them. And I'd look and I'd see that Milwaukee still had the worst fourth grade reading scores for African American children in the country. We're still dropping out half the kids out of high school each year. So I'm saying, how can all these organizations be achieving all these outcomes, yet citywide we're seeing no change? And one of the alums in my program, which I'll talk about later, was working at this group called Strive in Cincinnati. And she started telling me about the work that they were doing, in which they were actually citywide creating benefit. The conditions in the city for all the kids were changing. And I looked in Milwaukee and I saw another headline, that our teen pregnancy rate, which had been the highest in the country for a decade, was starting to decline. And I said, what's happening there? And what I started finding was this concept of collective impact. And so when we came together as a council, a lot of folks' perspective, and I'm sure you've heard this before with groups here, especially funders and powerful people, are like, let's find the best program and replicate it everywhere. And I came at it in a little bit different way. I said, well, what if we're about community solutions, let's not find a program with great outcomes. Let's find a solution that's worked citywide. Let's find a community where it's changed. And that's how we approach the work of the council, is that we started with a process of really looking at where are communities that have achieved change. And then what can we learn about that we can apply to the 6.7 million young people who are out of school and out of work. The reason, again, why we focused on this population was both moral and economic. The notion that you can have 1 out of every 6 young people in America with clearly no path to a future is just outrageous. And for those who are beyond the ability to be outraged, we'll make the economic case too. And we had a study done, and it was great. One of the members of our council was John Bridgeland, who was President Bush's domestic policy advisor. And he actually is the one who conducted the research, which was great because it held up politically, because we had Bush's domestic policy advisor saying it costs us $93 billion a year to not have this group of young people engaged. So there's the moral imperative, and I said, if that doesn't work for you, there's an economic imperative. Whoops. Clearly, I am not backing up my computer right now. So when we looked at this, we were able to really come at this in both ways. And in America, at least, when we looked at these young people, we realized that they come from all backgrounds, all races, urban, rural, male, female. But also we looked and we said, well, there's about half of these people have been chronically disconnected. They've never been connected. And another half of them are under-attached. And so clearly there's opportunity to move some of these people. The good news is when we looked at these young people, we saw hope. They're not young people who are saying, give me a handout. They're young people who are saying, give me a hand up. They're optimistic. They accept responsibility for improving their own lives. They'd love to even make a difference, and they're looking for opportunities where they can learn and earn and get mentors and really get on that path. They want that path, and they accept responsibility, but they need a pathway to get on. And so with that, we started thinking about, we know who the population is, we know what they need, how can we help them? And we looked at this issue of collective impact. And when we looked at collective impact, we recognized that we saw how in Milwaukee, where I live, how the organizations that have been coming together individually on their own for years and achieving outcomes with girls to prevent teen pregnancy, that wasn't working. So they pulled them together to create a campaign to reduce it citywide. And all the groups got around a table for the first time to talk to each other, and they recognized that a big part of the problem was boys. Not only that, but when they used data to look at the issue, they recognized that Statutory rape was a big part of the problem, that the majority of teen births in Milwaukee were caused by adult fathers. Well, all of a sudden they're starting to think, if we want to reduce teen pregnancy, what do we do? It wasn't just about self-esteem programs anymore. All of a sudden, together, they unite and fund a citywide anti-statutory rape campaign. They start doing programs for boys. They start doing all sorts of things differently. And lo and behold, in 3 years, our pregnancy rate's down 30%. It's on track to achieve the goal of reducing it by over half in 5 years, to bring it below national average from the highest in the country. Why? Because they came together, they formed a common set of goals, they set a common coordinated strategy, they shared data and information across organizations and worked together to do it. The United Way, in this case, served as a backbone, supporting and coordinating and evaluating. And together they've moved the needle. And so for us, this notion of community collaboratives is what we looked at as a way to address this issue of disconnected youth in America. To do this, with the help of the Bridgespan Group, which is a nonprofit consulting firm in the U.S., we studied 100 collaboratives across the country. And we found 22 that had moved the city's needle by 10 points or more, such as reducing teen pregnancy 30%, increasing graduation rates 20 points. And what we found, like John Caney and Mark Kramer's article, was a very similar set of characteristics. And I think you all know that work. So I don't need to go through this in detail, but I would say that it's the same things. Backbone organization, common strategy, coordinated activities, and a process by which the organizations are coming together, collaborating, and working towards shared outcomes and being accountable for results. And so for us, the other thing we recognized when we brought all these groups together, they'd never met with each other before. And so we helped build a network among these folks. But for us, that was the lesson about community collaboratives and collective impact. It was very exciting to find that this work really is successful. And a big part of our challenge in the United States is, there's this constant tension around taxes. And they think that you guys are crazy. I mean, you guys insure everybody. We just don't understand that. I got to Toronto, and all I've been hearing about in our political war is how the fact that we've started to go toward universal health care has sapped the economic spirit of America and will turn us socialistic, and there'll be no economy. And I got to Toronto, and I was just shocked to see that there are indeed skyscrapers and more being built, and clearly the economic interests of the country are just awful. But we, in our case, we recognize that we have to prove we can solve problems. Because we think a big reason why there's so much anti-government sentiment in the United States is because people are tired of seeing the crime rate continue to go up. The graduation rate, despite lots of spending and lots of programs, remain down. And so for me, the promise of collective impact is we can show we can solve problems again. We can create community solutions. We can get people to believe that if you invest in these issues, we can actually solve them. We can do what Tamarack's participated in across Canada around poverty, that we can actually change the conditions. We can have solutions. I mean, the notion of 1 out of 3 people in poverty, eliminating that is incredible. And you prove that gets people to have hope again. And then we start to live up to the promise of the poster in your office. Because right now, people don't believe we can solve, and that's what we're trying to do. The second thing we focused on, because the population, was about resources for employers. And so I should mention that I co-authored, the White House Council produced a toolkit on collective impact and also a white paper on it that if you haven't seen, the website will be up at the end too. It's www.serve.gov/council, and I'll have it up at the end. But it has our white papers and our toolkit on community collaboratives. Because of branding issues, they call them needle-moving collaboratives, but it's collective impact. You call it what you want. But with young people, we recognize the big thing was connecting them to employment. And we recognize that for these young people, they need soft skills, they need work-ready skills, and they need learn and earn opportunities. And so our council focused on, first, how do we work with employers to get young people those opportunities? And what we found was there were a lot of employers willing, especially large employers, to figure out how to do this. One of the most interesting was the Gap, which had demonstrated that they've actually been increasing employment of these disconnected young people and having success in retaining them and advancing them through their organization. And again, it was the recognition that it's not just about giving someone a job. You have to provide that development, the soft skills, the work-ready skills, and then the opportunity to learn while they earn, so that we can create that opportunity. And so the council focused on those two aspects, the employer toolkit and the community collaboratives toolkit, and issued a set of recommendations that are in a fancy report we did that, again, is all available online. And what came out were 6 recommendations that the White House brought to the country that we're following up on. One was prioritizing funding for needle-moving collaboratives. The second was to invest in innovation and scale up what's working. The third, to formalize youth input. The fourth, that all sectors increase job opportunities and pathways. The fifth was to provide high-quality, relevant career and technical as well as remedial education, that those aspects of our educational ecosystem need to be built up further and strengthened. And finally, increasing service opportunities. We found that young people, when they actually give back to their communities as a way to gain job skills and learning while working in organizations such as ours and yours, that was a huge opportunity for them, because those organizations end up being excellent opportunities to advance their careers. And so this work lives. We shut down the council 6 months early, and partly we did that because in the United States, with all the lawyers he had to talk to get me to talk here, that to cross the street, you have to talk to a lawyer there if you're a member of the council. But by shutting it down, it freed us up. And one of the cool things is Melody Barnes, who was the president's domestic policy advisor, is now leading the Aspen Forum on Community Solutions for Youth, which is a new effort which a number of foundations have put money in which Melody's going to be working to support collective impact efforts around the country around disconnected youth. And I just want to note how cool it is that the domestic policy advisor of the United States, who could focus on any issue, the environment, healthcare, whatever, decided to make this issue her legacy and her work as she left the White House, and to focus on the 6.7 million disconnected youth and focus on collective impact as the strategy. And so Melody hired Steve Patrick, who was a funder from the Gates Foundation, to lead this effort. And the two of them are going to drive an effort to support multiple communities to begin collective impact efforts around disconnected youth. Another thing that came about is we're working with a group of federal agencies to look at how we share data and reduce that fragmentation. Because there are actually rules in grants from the Housing and Urban Development Department that would prevent someone from working with the Labor Department, or prevent someone from sharing the same data with the Health and Human Services. I mean, it's crazy because the way the grants are constructed, it's often if you get one federal grant, you're not allowed to get another. Well, then it reduces that ability for people to work together and share resources. So we're trying within the government to break down barriers. And Bridge, who was President Bush's domestic policy advisor, has been very helpful in figuring out how to take the money that's already being spent and use it more wisely to support coordinated collective activities. We have a social innovation office at the White House that's looking at how do we find programs and scale them up and get those solutions to as many communities as possible and get those practices out. We have the Employers Toolkit, and a group of employers, including places like the Gap and Starbucks and others, are helping lead an effort in the private sector to get private sector employers to make commitments around creating opportunities for young people. We have an education task force that created a set of principles and are really looking at how we shore up higher education, and the Gates Foundation's been investing a lot in community colleges, for example. And then we're looking at AmeriCorps, which is our federal national service program, and others, as ways we can expand opportunities for these young people to serve and make a difference while they gain skills and education. And so it wasn't a report that's sitting on the shelf. It's leading to real work and real follow-up. And to me, it's been a very exciting process. And for the young people we're working with, I just can't think of more important work because I work with these young people every day. And what I see is the hope and promise and the opportunity that exists within them. We've defined these young people as opportunity youth, because we see the opportunity in their hopes and dreams, but we also know the opportunity exists for our nation if we actually put these young people to productive work and engage their leadership and their assets. And so that's the work of the White House Council on Community Solutions. And again, it's a pleasure to talk about this work, and as I said, I'd be happy to take some questions and some discussion on the White House Council work, and then I think we'll take a break, and then I'm going to talk about leadership and kind of what I've learned about what's the leadership that we need to be able to do this work effectively in communities. And so thank you.